What if I told you that the average person spends 40 years working only to retire with less money in the bank than a used car is worth? Yes, you heard that right. Imagine dedicating your entire life to showing up at the office, dealing with managers, endless emails, soul-crushing commutes, and still ending up at the finish line with barely enough to buy a second-hand sedan. Shocking, isn't it? But that's not even the scariest part. Here's the real mystery that should haunt you. How is it possible that millions of hardworking people earn salaries year after year, yet somehow arrive at retirement with their financial cupboards nearly empty? It's as if we've all been following a script written by someone who doesn't want us to win. Today, I'm going to show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. But I'll warn you right now, what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about money. These aren't opinions or theories. These are brutal facts about the average American, backed by real data. If you're ready to see the truth, comment "wake up call" below. Let's start with the paycheck, because that's where the first lie begins. Let's start with the first shocking number. The typical full-time worker in America pulls in around $55,000 a year. When you first hear that, it sounds decent, right? Not rich, but solid middle-class income. You could work with that. Pay your bills, save a little, maybe take a vacation once a year. Sounds reasonable. But wait until Uncle Sam steps in with his scissors. Federal tax slices off a chunk. State tax takes another bite. Social Security nibbles away at your paycheck. Medicare grabs its share. And by the time the dust settles, most people are actually living on something closer to $37,000 to $42,000. Let that sink in for a second. Imagine this. You're pouring yourself a tall glass of water. You watch it fill all the way to the brim. You're already thinking about how refreshing that first sip is going to be. And then, right before you can even lift it to your lips, someone walks over and yanks away nearly a third of it. Just gone. Poured down the drain before you got any benefit from it. That's your paycheck. That's your reality. You thought you were earning $55,000, but you're actually living on $40,000 or less. And here's what makes it worse. Most people don't even realize this is happening. They see the $55,000 number on their job offer and think that's what they have to work with. They make spending decisions based on a number that doesn't actually exist in their bank account. So they finance the car they think they can afford. They rent the apartment that fits their imaginary $55,000 budget. They swipe the credit card thinking they're being reasonable, but the whole time, they're spending based on an illusion. They're operating on a salary that disappeared the moment it hit their account. This is the first crack in the foundation. This is where the average person starts losing before they even know the game has begun. They're playing with $37,000 while thinking they have $55,000. And that gap, that $18,000 gap between what they think they earn and what they actually get to keep, that's where dreams go to die. This is your wake-up call. Your paycheck is smaller than you think. And if you don't understand that, everything else that follows is going to hurt even more. Now, here's where it gets truly terrifying. According to national surveys, the typical American has set aside just $70,000 for retirement. Stop and picture that number for a second. $70,000. Roll it around in your mind. That might sound like a decent pile of cash until you realize that's what people are expecting to live on for the rest of their lives. The rest of their lives. Let me put this in perspective. $70,000 is not even enough to buy a modest house in most cities. It's less than 2 years of the salary we just talked about. And yet this is what the average person has accumulated after working for 4 decades. After waking up at 6 in the morning for 40 years, after sitting in traffic, after dealing with difficult bosses and office politics, and mandatory meetings that could have been emails, after sacrificing time with their kids, missing soccer games, skipping family dinners because they had to work late. After all of that, they have $70,000. But here's the real shock that should make your stomach drop. Roughly 1 in 4 people hasn't saved a single dollar for retirement. Not $1, zero, nothing. Picture this, 1 out of every 4 people you know is heading into their 60s and 70s with absolutely no financial cushion whatsoever. It's like watching someone walk into a snowstorm wearing a t-shirt and shorts, just hoping that somehow they won't freeze to death. And who do these people expect to save them? Social Security. They're banking everything on a government program that's been on shaky ground for decades. It's like building your dream home on top of sand dunes near the ocean. Sure, it might hold up for a little while. The foundation might seem solid when you first lay it down, but eventually the tides come in, the wind picks up, the sand shifts, and those cracks you try to ignore, they become chasms. Depending solely on Social Security isn't a retirement plan. It's a prayer. It's crossing your fingers and hoping the system doesn't collapse before you do. And even if it survives, the benefits aren't enough to live comfortably. You're looking at maybe $1,500 to $2,000 a month if you're lucky. Try building a retirement on that when rent alone costs more. This is the second shock. Most people have saved almost nothing, and they're counting on a system that might not be there when they need it. It gets worse. Let's zoom in by age group. Because when you break down the numbers, the picture gets even darker. Picture a 24-year-old at their first real job. They're excited, optimistic, dreaming about their future. You'd expect that after a few years of working, they'd have at least a small nest egg starting to form, right? Wrong. The median savings for people under 25 is less than $2,000. Think about that, less than $2,000. That's about the cost of a used laptop or a vacation that went slightly over budget. That's what the average young person has to show for years of work. Now, let's move up the ladder. By the time workers reach their early 30s, that number grows to around $15,000. $15,000 sounds better, doesn't it? Until you remember that these people are now a decade into their careers. They've been working for 10 years, and they've accumulated the equivalent of what a decent used car costs. They've got a decade of experience, maybe a decade of rent payments or mortgage payments, and barely enough saved to cover a few months of emergencies. But surely it gets better as people get older and wiser, right? Surely when people finally reach what we call the golden years, the numbers start to shine. Not quite. The median retirement balance for those over 65 hovers around $95,000. And here's where you need to brace yourself for the gut punch. If you follow the classic 4% withdrawal rule, which financial experts recommend to make sure you don't run out of money, that $95,000 translates into about $3,800 per year, that breaks down to just over $300 per month. $300 a month. Let me repeat that so it really sinks in. $300. You can't even cover a week of groceries and utilities with that amount, let alone healthcare, transportation, housing, and all the little emergencies that life loves to throw at you. Imagine this. You work for 4 decades. You trade your youth, your energy, your time with family. You sacrifice your mornings, your evenings, your weekends. And after all that, your reward is $300 a month. That's less spending money than a teenager makes working part-time at a coffee shop on weekends. This isn't a retirement dream. This is a retirement nightmare playing out in real time for millions of people. Now, if so many people are undersaving and heading toward disaster, how exactly are they managing their daily lives right now? What does the average household actually spend each month? And more importantly, how does that compare to what they're bringing home? When you see these numbers, your jaw's gonna drop. According to recent surveys, the average American family burns through about $6,000 every single month. That's over $70,000 a year. Just let that number sit with you for a moment. $70,000 is going out the door annually. Now, remember what we just talked about. The typical worker is taking home closer to $40,000 after taxes, but the typical household is spending $70,000. Do you see the problem here? Where on earth is that extra $30,000 coming from? How do you spend $30,000 more than you earn? The answer is both simple and absolutely terrifying. Debt. Credit cards, car loans, personal loans, home equity lines, a never-ending cycle of borrowing just to keep the lights on and the illusion alive. It's like trying to fill a bathtub while the drain is wide open at the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, no matter how hard you work to keep that faucet running, the tub never fills up. You're just watching your efforts swirl down the drain in real time. Let's break down where that $6,000 a month actually goes, because the details make it even worse. Housing alone devours about $2,000 monthly, and that's just an average. If you live in a city like San Francisco or New York, $2,000 doesn't even get you a closet with a window. You're paying that much to live in a shoebox. Then comes food, nearly $700 a month. Now, $700 might not sound outrageous for feeding a family until you multiply it by 12 months. That's $8,400 a year just on eating, not even dining at fancy restaurants. Just existing and needing calories to survive. Transportation takes another massive bite out of your budget. Car payments, because almost everyone is financing. Gas prices that seem to only go up. Insurance that keeps getting more expensive. Maintenance and repairs. Add it all together and you're easily looking at $1,000 a month. And here's the crazy part. We've only accounted for $3,700 so far. You haven't even touched healthcare, utilities, insurance, education, clothing, or entertainment yet. But somehow, the average family is spending $6,000. The math doesn't work. It can't work unless you're drowning in debt. Here's shock number 5, and this one should make your blood run cold. The average household is lugging around over $10,000 in credit card debt. Now, 10 grand might not sound completely catastrophic at first. You might think, okay, that's manageable. But wait until you peek at the interest rates these people are paying. We're talking about 20% or more, 20%. Let me show you what that actually means in real dollars. If you're carrying $10,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest, you're paying $2,000 every single year just in interest. Not paying down the balance, not making progress, just paying the bank for the privilege of being in debt. $2,000 vanishing into thin air, buying you absolutely nothing. And here's what makes it even more insane. That balance barely shrinks. It's like running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up while the floor beneath you tilts backward. No matter how fast you sprint, no matter how hard you pump your legs, you're not actually moving forward. You're just exhausting yourself while staying in the exact same spot, or worse, sliding backward. But wait, it gets darker. You might assume that this mountain of debt comes from emergencies, medical bills, unexpected car repairs, things people had no control over. And sure, some of it does. But studies show that a shockingly large slice of credit card balances comes from non-essential spending. Dinners out at restaurants, impulse purchases, scrolling through Amazon at midnight, flashy gadgets and electronics that get used for a month before being forgotten in a drawer somewhere. Think about what that really means. People are spending thousands of dollars just to temporarily rent objects they don't need. They're paying 20% interest to own a thing for a few weeks before it becomes clutter. It's financial insanity wrapped in convenience and sold as a lifestyle. Here's the brutal truth about high-interest debt. It turns every purchase into a payment plan from hell. That $50 dinner you charged, if you only make minimum payments, that dinner ends up costing you $90 by the time interest is done with you. You're not buying things anymore. You're renting them at predatory rates while someone else gets rich off your inability to say no. Short-term joy, long-term shackles. That's what debt is. And the average person is wearing those shackles so tightly they can barely breathe, let alone build any kind of wealth. Now, let's talk about the scorecard that reveals everything. Net worth. It's the most brutally honest number in your entire financial life. It's the sum of everything you own minus everything you owe. And for the average person, it's nowhere near where it should be. When you see just how low it really is, you'll finally understand why so many people end up trapped in the same cycle, generation after generation. Let's rip the bandage off. The median net worth for households in America sits at around $100,000. At first glance, that might sound okay. 100 grand feels substantial, but watch what happens when we break it down by age, because that's when the real horror show begins. If you're under 35 years old, the median net worth is barely $15,000. Let that sink in. After an entire decade of working, grinding through entry-level jobs, climbing the ladder, putting in the hours, most young adults have built up less wealth than the price of a modest used car. A decade of life traded for the equivalent of a Honda Civic. By the time people hit their mid-40s, that number rises to just under 90,000. Still shockingly low for someone who's halfway through their entire career. In their 50s, it reaches around 170,000. And finally, for those approaching retirement in their 60s, the figure peaks at about 250,000. Now, here comes the gut punch that should wake you up in the middle of the night. If you retire with $250,000 in total assets, and you try to follow the conservative safe withdrawal rule of 4%, you know what you get? You'll only be able to spend around $10,000 per year. That breaks down to less than $900 a month. $900. Picture this for a moment. You've worked for 40 years. You woke up before dawn thousands of times. You commuted through traffic and rain and snow and blazing heat. You sacrificed weekends with your family. You dealt with office politics, difficult coworkers, bosses who didn't appreciate you, meetings that wasted your time, and projects that stressed you out. You traded the best years of your life, your youth, your energy, your health for a paycheck. And after all of that, after 4 decades of sacrifice, your reward is $900 a month. That barely covers groceries and utility bills, let alone healthcare, housing, transportation, and all the little emergencies that life throws at you as you get older. It's a cruel joke that nobody's laughing at. So why is this happening? How did millions of people end up in this nightmare? The answer is right here, and it's the final shock you need to see. The average savings rate in America is just 6%. 6. That's it. Think about what that means. For every $100 someone earns, only $6 gets tucked away. And here's what makes it worse. Out of that measly $6, much of it goes towards short-term goals like buying a car or scraping together a down payment on a house. By the time retirement savings get their cut, there's almost nothing left. People are trying to build a lifetime of financial security with pocket change. But the nightmare doesn't end there. Let's talk about the retirement age gap, because this is where things get truly cruel. The average retirement age in America is 61. On paper, that sounds great. Retire early, live free, enjoy your golden years. But here's the brutal problem nobody talks about. Full Social Security benefits don't kick in until age 67. That leaves a 6-year gap that you have to bridge entirely on your own. Picture this. You're 61 years old. You've finally broken free from decades of work. The alarm clock is turned off. The commute is over. You should be celebrating. But instead, you're anxiously calculating whether you can afford meat at dinner or if you need to cut the cable bill just to survive another month. You're choosing between heating your house in winter or filling your prescription. That's not retirement, that's survival mode with gray hair. And here's the twist that makes it even scarier. Someone who reaches 65 today can expect to live nearly 2 more decades. 20 years, maybe even 25, that's longer than most people's entire childhood and education combined. Think about funding 2.5 decades of life with no paycheck coming in. 2.5 decades of rent or mortgage, of food, of healthcare that only gets more expensive as you age, of transportation, of just existing. How will you survive 25 years on $900 a month? You won't, not comfortably, not with dignity. You'll be cutting pills in half, eating less, skipping doctor visits, becoming a burden on your kids who are struggling with their own financial disasters. This is the reality for the average person. 40 years of work rewarded with 25 years of anxiety, scarcity, and fear. That's what average gets you. And now you know why you need to be anything but average. So now you've seen them. The brutal, shocking numbers that most people never stop to look at. The average person works 40 years and retires with $70,000, which gives them $300 a month to live on. They're carrying $10,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest, paying $2,000 a year for the privilege of being broke. They're spending $70,000 annually while only earning $40,000 after taxes. Their net worth after a lifetime of sacrifice is barely $100,000, and they're saving just 6% of everything they make. But here's the twist. This isn't meant to paralyze you with fear. It's meant to wake you up, because beating these numbers is not as hard as it looks. You don't need a 6-figure salary or a genius IQ. All you need is consistency. Save more than 6%. Aim for 20. Avoid toxic debt like your life depends on it, because it does. Invest steadily in boring index funds that actually work. Do these simple things, and you'll already be far ahead of average. And average, as we've just seen, is shockingly, tragically low. Comment "not average" and tell me which shocking number hit you hardest. Was it the $300 retirement, the $10,000 in debt, the 6% savings rate? Hit that subscribe button, because every person who watches this is one more person who wakes up before it's too late. The average is broken. Average is 40 years of work for $900 a month. But you don't have to be average. You just saw the numbers. Now choose what you're going to do about them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.